A Maryland law is overturned, making it easier for people to get a gun.
The average citizen won today.
It did absolutely nothing to deal with crime in our state.
Why the law was deemed unconstitutional and the effect this ruling could have on other gun laws in Maryland. A state commission charged with preventing hate crimes suspends one of its members over alleged hate speech. The social media posts about Israel sparking outrage. New insight into the second suspect in the Morgan State shooting. The tips sparked from our coverage that led to his arrest and the crimes he was allegedly still committing while on the run.
Keep those umbrellas handy. This weather maker is not done yet. I'm timing out the impact to your Thanksgiving travel plans hour by hour.
Live from WBFF in Baltimore, this is Fox 45 News at 10.
We are following breaking news in the Middle East. Israel's cabinet has agreed to a hostage deal with Hamas that will send 50 Israeli women and children home.
The deal is not official. We'll have more on the terms and how the U.S. is responding in a few minutes.
Some late-night drivers out on the road tonight trying to beat the crowds ahead of the busiest travel day of the year tomorrow.
More than 55 million Americans will hit the road or skies for Thanksgiving, but much of that travel has been hampered by a wave of storms moving across the Northeast. Good evening, I'm Kai Jackson.
And I'm Mary Bubala. Let's get right to Chief Meteorologist Jonathan Myers with a look at tomorrow's travel forecast. Jonathan?
Yeah, we are in the middle of that line of storms, and actually it's just a big batch of heavy rain. Look at this, red, yellow, orange. It's almost like an attack of the rain here coming in northern portions of Baltimore County, back down into central portions of Howard County. If I had a choice to delay my travel until maybe another couple hours from now, I would definitely do it, because this is going to give you widespread ponding on those roadways. It also is going to give you the potential of very reduced visibility, as if it hasn't been bad enough already. Overnight, though, things will improve. This is what I'm saying. After about 3-4.
Huge problem.
According to the ATF, more than 7,000 handguns were stolen last year in Maryland.
Jeff mentioned Senate Bill 1, which limits where legal gun owners can bring their weapons in the state. Lawmakers pushed to pass that bill during the last legislative session, but several other bills relating to the crime didn't move forward. That includes the Violent Firearm Offender Act, which Republicans plan to reintroduce next session. Lawmakers also declined to make amendments to key juvenile crime laws, which some say contributed to a surge in youth violence this year.
But basically, they kind of put, the criminal justice, the crime stuff on the back burner. And the problem is, if you leave something on the back burner and the burner is on, the pot's going to explode. And what's happened is the pot has exploded.
In the month since this year's session ended, there have been several high-profile crimes involving juveniles. 2 teens charged in the Brooklyn Day mass shooting in July were under supervision from the Department of Juvenile Services at the time. Earlier this month, a 14- and 12-year-old were caught on camera allegedly beating a woman and trying to steal her car in Butchers Hill. The boys were released just hours later after a call with DJS. The decision to release them prompted accountability questions from the 14-year-old's mother, joining police and prosecutors in voicing their frustration with DJS.
I had no awareness that he was doing all these types of activities. I mean, something's got to give, because like I said, the way he going, he not. Not going to be here the way he keep going. He needs more discipline, more structure.
If you don't work on this immediately, and you say we're going to look at it in January, and we're going to ask the governor to sign it in April, May, or June, and it's effective in July or maybe October, the wake of victims is going to be tremendous.
They come in, we can't detain them, they're back in the community the next day. They get picked up for the second one. Can't detain them. They're back in the community again the next.
Mayoral candidate Sheila Dixon says Baltimore needs to be better about addressing violence after a double shooting last night near Mondawmin Mall. Dixon was set to speak at Maceo's, a business near the shooting, but her appearance was canceled.
It is not the first time Dixon has been critical of the mayor in recent days. Just hours before the shooting, Dixon told Fox 45 News she'd never seen this level of dysfunction from City Hall, echoing comments from Councilman Eric Costello last week and following the mayor's response on WBAL radio.
I have to deal with the city on a regular basis with my clients, and I can see the dysfunction, not in one agency, but practically in every agency. And that is reflected of the leadership, you know, and it's reflected in who you hire, the people that work for you. I've never seen city government so dysfunctional as it is now.
Leadership that's failing the city is almost a laughable comment when my leadership has the city on pace to be under 300 homicides for the first time in 9 years. Investing in our education, opening rec centers, not closing them like the person he's endorsing did when she was mayor.
Many attribute the drop in homicides to the partnership between City State's Attorney Ivan Bates and U.S. Attorney for Maryland Eric Barron. Both promised a tougher on crime approach in the city. Homicides are down 20%, and non-fatal shootings are down 9% since that partnership began. Mayor Scott addressed the claim.
I love them both dearly. Their cases are made by police officers that work for Brandon Scott, the mayor of Baltimore City. We direct. The arrests are done by us. All the enforcement is done by us.
Shootings and homicides are down. Critics say there are flaws in the mayor's crime-fighting plan. They point to skyrocketing car thefts. Baltimore has seen the number of thefts more than triple this year compared to last year. More than 10,000 cars have been stolen. Police say nearly 40% of people arrested in these cases are juveniles. Well, the Safe Streets plan is a centerpiece of Mayor Scott's crime plan, but the program continues to face transparency questions amid an FBI investigation into several locations and employees. Fox 45 News showed up to an advertised Safe Streets meeting on Friday, finding a locked door and empty building. Mackenzie Frost continues the story.
On social media, the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement promoting several Safe Streets events, including this expungement clinic held here at the Belvedere Safe Streets location off Park Heights Avenue. The flyer says the event lasting from 3 to 6 in the afternoon. But when Fox 45's photographer showed up around 4:30, the door was locked. Monzi completely ignoring our questions about the event. The apparent lack of event, despite being advertised, isn't the only thing we've reached out to Monzi asking questions about. The city's online map showing where the Safe Street zones are and each location. The map lists the Franklin Square location at 5 North Calhoun Street. So we went to that spot. We found a building seemingly under construction. No signs of Safe Streets. Monzi again ignoring our questions about the location of this site. And that brings us here to the whiteboards. We know the feds are investigating at least one Safe Streets location and at least one employee. We know we've been sending several questions to the mayor and his administration asking things like, will you release the names of the Safe Streets workers? Mayor Brandon Scott often says no. Will you launch an investigation into all the Safe Streets sites? Again, the mayor says the current federal investigation is isolated to just one location and one employee right now. So he says more investigations aren't necessary. So now we have some new questions for the mayor and for Monzi about the Safe Streets program. According to the contracts the city has with the two nonprofits, those organizations are supposed to cover the cost for the background checks for Safe Streets employees. But we have documentation showing that the nonprofits are seeking reimbursement from the city for those background checks. So we want to know who's actually responsible for covering the cost of the background checks for the Safe Streets employees. And that raises questions about an audit. Some members of the city's audit commission have told us that they support an audit of Monzi. And we asked Mayor Brandon Scott about it recently. Here's what he said.
Talk to the comptroller. We're open for any audit and we'll be working with him first because that is what the people of Baltimore have voted by charter to have the city comptroller of Baltimore City duly elected by the residents to do that job. And we know he's a fabulous comptroller and he'll do that.
So if the state auditors were to say they wanted to do it, would you support that?
I just answered that question. City first, and then if the state wants to step in and do that, they can have at it. We're not hiding anything, and we know that the organizations that we work with, LifeBridge and others, who have audits of their own, They're not hiding anything either.
So as we continue to dig into the inner workings of the Safe Streets program, we need help from you. If you have any information about this program that you think I need to know about, send it to me directly. SafeStreetsTips@gmail.com. Meanwhile, we'll continue to demand answers from Mayor Brandon Scott and his administration about the Safe Streets program. At the Accountability Desk, Mackenzie Frost, Fox 45 News.
That brings us to our question of the day. Do you think Safe Streets needs to be paused until the public learns more about the organization? 95% of those who voted say yes. To make your voice heard, head to foxbaltimore.com/vote.
Coming up on Fox 45 News at 10, we're learning more about the second suspect arrested in connection with the mass shooting at Morgan State University, how Fox 45's reporting helped authorities track him down. Baltimore City could soon raise the minimum wage for tipped workers, why experts say a similar plan in D.C. is getting some mixed results and the impact it could have on you. And a member of the state commission aimed at preventing hate crimes is suspended over alleged hate speech. The comments sparking outrage and why some are now calling her a hypocrite.
Breaking news, Israel's cabinet has voted to approve a deal with Hamas to release some of the 200 hostages. Hamas is expected to release around 50 Israeli women and children in exchange for some Palestinian prisoners.
And while the deal is not official yet, U.S. officials hope a 3-year-old American girl will be among those released. The hostage deal is expected to come with a pause in the fighting. The State Department says the deal will have no impact on humanitarian aid into Gaza.
An agreement on hostages would release or would unlock the potential for delivery of more humanitarian assistance. So we're hopeful that that would take place. But again, it has always been our position that the two don't need to be linked, that humanitarian assistance should be delivered as quickly as possible for the benefit of the Palestinian people.
The Maryland Attorney General is suspending a member of the state's Commission on Hate Crimes Response and Prevention. A statement from Attorney General Anthony Brown's office says Zainab Chowdhury's posts on her social media pages since October 7th, quote, risk disrupting the work and mission of the commission. Well, the posts are about the war in Israel. Chowdhury claims babies murdered in a Hamas attack were fake and compared Israel to Nazi Germany, among other things. Fox 45 spoke with political commentator Armstrong Williams, who says her posts are troubling. He believes she should not return to the commission.
Anytime you start out comparing Israel to Nazi Germany, that is a serious problem. And it's one thing to say I am pro-Palestinian, but to not to condemn Hamas once for the savage attacks of Israel on October the 7th, and all you talk about is advocating and somebody needs to defend Palestinians. Yeah, defend the innocents in Palestine, but also condemn the savagery of Hamas that happened that weekend where thousands of Jews died for no reason.
Attorney General Brown is now calling on all members of the commission to be careful of their posts on social media, saying anything perceived as hate speech might disrupt the commission's work.
Well, Fox 45 News spoke with Chowdhury just last week. She spoke out after a Johns Hopkins doctor was placed on leave for his anti-Palestinian posts on social media, calling for him to be fired and for his medical license to be revoked. Armstrong Williams now calling those demands hypocritical.
She is doing not only the same thing, but much worse, comparing Israel to Nazi Germany. You would think by now that all people in these roles of trust, where you have influence and people watch you, from what has happened at Cornell, Harvard, George Washington University, you would think now that people would be sensitive to the fact that you don't want to ever be perceived as pushing anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, anti-Jewish sentiment and comparing them to Nazi Germany.
Well, Williams right there bringing up anti-Semitic sentiments on college campuses. Senator Mitt Romney signed an open letter from Harvard alumni to university leaders slamming what they called a rise in anti-Semitism on campus. Former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan also withdrew his fellowship over what he calls dangerous anti-Semitism at Harvard. Now, earlier this month, Jewish students and community leaders raised concerns after a message referencing the Holocaust was found on the University of Maryland campus after a pro-Palestine rally. Dozens of Maryland lawmakers are threatening to withdraw funding from CASA of Maryland after its longtime director made pro-Palestinian comments on social media that lawmakers called hate speech. While some advocate groups have defended CASA's right to free speech, the group did apologize for those comments. And now state lawmakers across the nation are taking action against anti-Semitism. National correspondent Christine Frizzell has a closer look at what's happening in New York.
The group Students for Justice in Palestine more vocal than ever at universities nationwide. But some now accuse them of supporting Hamas and terrorism. A bipartisan group of New York lawmakers asking Governor Kathy Hochul to shut down the group at area universities. In a letter writing, SJPs across the state have released statements that endorse attacks on civilians, arguing their rallies include chants from the Hamas charter, calling for the death and annihilation of Jews and Israel. Some chapters already suspended elsewhere. At a time, the Department of Education has launched an investigation into 7 schools for alleged incidents of anti-Semitism, which have skyrocketed since the October 7th Hamas-led attack in Israel and the weeks of bombing by Israel that have followed in Gaza.
Colleges should be places where students could express themselves, and it's okay to have different beliefs. And it's okay to express those different beliefs. But when it becomes a threat to students, or when students can't feel safe walking from their dorm to their classroom because they're afraid that they're going to get harmed, that's unacceptable.
A professor at Wake Forest University resigning after backlash from this post on X, appearing to sympathize with the October 7th attack, writing, "So it's kind of a duh, but if you turn me out of my house and confine what's left of my family to the small impoverished state you run as an open-air prison, I could be tempted to shoot up your dance party." There are also new alarm bells in New York following a brand new threat assessment by the New York State Intelligence Center of increased threats of a terror attack. Governor Hochul announcing new actions and $3 million in new funding to beef up staffing. But she's also demanding social media companies take action.
And as the steward of the 21st century public square, TikTok and other social media companies, they must start to regulate vile hate speech that originates on their platforms.
All of these warnings come as the FBI says it had already been operating on high alert before the war in the Middle East, with threats surging ever since. In Washington, I'm Christine Frizzell.
Violent crime is on the rise in parts of the country. How citizens are trying to hold the justice system accountable.
And a hefty batch of rain now moving across portions of Baltimore City, Baltimore County into Harford County and eventually down toward Anne Arundel. This stuff's going to really cause a lot of problems for late night travels here, with the potential of some Blinding downpours as well as some ponding. Notice by 11:45, still getting some heavy rain here in Baltimore, beginning to move east by about 1 a.m. Starting to clear the area into tomorrow early morning. I'm going to let you know what you're going to be dealing with for Wednesday busy holiday travels in my Weather Authority forecast.
And we just saw that line on the radar over Towson, and here's a live look. Our cameras are dotted with lots of rainfall tonight. Stay with us. We'll be right back. As violent crime is on the decline nationwide, one state is seeing the opposite trend, and now citizens are trying to hold their elected leaders responsible.
National correspondent Kayla Gaskins explains how top prosecutors in California are facing some heat.
Communities fed up with rising crime are pointing fingers at progressive district attorneys who often opt for lighter sentences and less jail time for criminals.
My concern is public safety.
According to FBI crime data, California's violent crime rate is 31% higher than the national average. In Alameda County, residents now pushing to recall their progressive prosecutor, Pamela Price. The recall effort reportedly close to getting the number of signatures needed to move forward.
Anybody could be a victim at any time. Business owners are losing their businesses. People are losing their lives. And we continue to not see it as important.
LA's progressive prosecutor George Gascon dodged two similar recall efforts in the last 2 years. San Franciscans removed their progressive DA, Chesa Boudin, last summer. Boudin, Gascon, and Price all received backing from groups tied to the far-left activist billionaire megadonor George Soros.
Soros realized that you don't actually need to change the laws, you just need to change how they're enforced.
Soros tends to focus on smaller races where donations can have a big impact.
And one of the things he noticed was that that the value for money in local races is much higher than it is in national races.
It's an effective strategy. In 2022, 1 in 5 Americans were represented by a Soros-linked DA, according to data compiled by the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Aside from recalling DAs, citizens taking their frustrations to city council races. In Seattle, only 3 of 9 city council members who led the 2020 Defund the Police movement were voted back into office. Leaders of the group pushing for a recall of Alameda County's progressive DA say they'll be visiting Washington, D.C. next month to meet with the Biden administration. In Washington, I'm Kayla Gaskins.
Kayla mentioned George Soros. At least a dozen top prosecutors with ties to him have left office in the past 2 years, including former Baltimore City State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby. A Fox 45 News investigation in 2019 found Mosby went to Portugal with the group that received millions of dollars from Open Society, a group backed by Soros. When Mosby came back, she announced that she'd no longer prosecute low-level drug possession crimes. Baltimore City Council member Zeke Cohen also outlined his work with Open Society on his 2022 ethics disclosure form. Cohen stood by his work, saying he receives money for consulting work done in cities outside of Baltimore.
Ahead at 10:30, new insight in the second Morgan State shooting arrest, how our coverage may have helped police find the suspect.
As Baltimore considers a policy to raise minimum wage for tipped workers, how a similar plan in D.C. could be impacting their decision.
We are following 3 big stories at 10:30. Baltimore City continues to expand its assistance programs, while one taxpayer expert questions how your money is being spent.
A proposal to raise the minimum wage for tipped workers in Baltimore is gaining steam. How a similar plan in D.C. has fared over its first several months.
And on the heels of a second arrest in the Morgan State University mass shooting, we are learning a Fox 45 viewer may have helped police track down the suspect. And we begin there as we're learning more about the suspect's criminal background.
Fox 45's Alexa Ashwell explains how our coverage played a part in the capture.
The search for Morgan State University mass shooting suspect Javon Williams now over. Investigators say after appearing on Maryland's Most Wanted, police received tips Williams, a known member of the notorious D.C. gang, the Kennedy Street Crew, was still in the area and committing armed robberies and carjackings. Investigators finally tracking down Williams November 17th after they say he and 2 other suspects went on a crime spree in D.C. Williams, 20-year-old Keon Brown, and a 16-year-old were all taken into custody after a brief pursuit. Investigators believe he's a member of the Kennedy Street Crew, and at the time of the Morgan State University mass shooting was already facing federal charges related to the gang's alleged drug trafficking operation. In last month's episode on Maryland's Most Wanted, it was revealed at the time of the mass shooting on MSU's campus, Williams was already wanted for his alleged role in a federal drug trafficking case. Back in June of this year, officials in D.C. announced the takedown of the operation and detailed the defendants were members of the gang Kennedy Street Crew. Williams and some of the others listed still at large.
It is not just the danger of the drugs being peddled, it is also the money and firearms associated with these drug operations. They combine to form a toxic mix for fueling violence.
Police unable to track down Williams before investigators say he and a 17-year-old opened fire on MSU's campus, shooting 5 people, including 4 students, in early October. Now we're learning one of the suspects arrested alongside Williams, 20-year-old Keon Brown, is also listed in this federal drug trafficking indictment. In the indictment, investigators detail between 2019 and 2023, the Kennedy Street Crew sold marijuana, fentanyl, and crack, used firearms to protect territory and contraband, and concealed their proceeds using shell businesses and other methods of laundering. A copy of a search warrant executed back in January of this year shows Williams and Brown as 2 of the 9 people charged after agents found the group in a home in D.C. with nearly a dozen firearms. 2 members now finally off the streets. Alexa Ashwell, Fox 45 News.
Both the Morgan State shooting suspects were captured in D.C., where Mayor Muriel Bowser just declared a public emergency on youth crime. At a D.C. council meeting tonight, lawmakers approved a formal public emergency through February 15th, and this frees up resources for the city's Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services and gives the mayor emergency powers. But not all council members agreed with the decision.
We have to move forward, I believe, in a way that allows the executive to move quickly.
Just waving a magic wand and saying the mayor should have all power here without more information provided is pretty dangerous.
Fox 45 News Press Mayor Brandon Scott and mayoral candidate Sheila Dixon on whether a similar declaration should be made in Baltimore.
Let's remember, everybody, that D.C. is a city that's governed differently than ours and any other city in the country. Essentially, D.C. is a city and a state at the same time. They control a whole manner of juvenile systems that we don't, because we have the fabulous state of Maryland, like juvenile service, like social service, like CPS. All of those things are not under the preview of the mayor.
It's gotten out of control, and we've waited so long before we started dealing with this sooner, which we should have when we saw a trend. When we saw 5 cars being stolen or 5 carjacks, we should have gotten on it and figured out what we needed to do to stop it.
Well, state Republicans are touting a 5-part proposal to address crime, including the Juvenile Justice Restoration Act. It would force anyone under 13 charged with a gun crime or any child arrested for the same nonviolent crime 3 times to automatically go into DJS supervision. But the plan doesn't address problems we've seen with home detention once a child leaves DJS. State lawmakers will hold another juvenile crime hearing in December.
As Baltimore considers a proposal to raise minimum wage for tipped workers, Fox 45 News looks into how a similar plan has fared for the first few months in D.C. Experts say that program has seen mixed results. Fox 45's Amy Simpson has the story.
In Washington, D.C., it's been 6 months of Initiative 82, part of a nationwide movement to raise the minimum wage for tipped restaurant workers. But the jury's out on how it's going.
In places where it has happened, like in D.C.,
it's been something of a disaster.
Anybody who eats out in DC knows that the DC restaurant industry is booming right now. It is very busy.
This report released earlier this month by One Fair Wage, saying it's too early to conduct a full analysis of Initiative 82. But president of this special interest organization claims wages are up and restaurants are thriving since the measure passed.
The opposition is going to say that, things have failed and everything is horrible. The data shows the opposite. So we are not claiming that because of I-82, wages have gone up, tips have gone up, but we are saying the data is very clear that the industry has not failed.
Meanwhile, the Employment Policies Institute claims Initiative 82 is changing the customer experience. Some restaurants opting to raise menu prices.
Customers don't want to pay $40 for a roast chicken or, $25 for a cheeseburger. And so instead, what the restaurants do is they say, instead of doing tips now, we'll add a mandatory 20% service charge onto the bill at the end of the meal.
And in turn, having an impact on the money servers are taking home.
Whereas the tip goes entirely to the worker, the service charge can be kept by the restaurant. And so maybe the worker cedes half of it.
The Restaurant Association of Maryland also against the movement, pointing to its views on the impact in Washington, D.C.
It has become abundantly clear in Washington, D.C. that people are dining out less, they are tipping less, some are not tipping at all, and servers are taking a significant reduction in earnings than what they are used to prior to the elimination of tip credit.
Now, One Fair Wage is involved in efforts to change the pay model for restaurants in Baltimore City. This online event indicates the group will be at City Hall December 6th, rallying for the cause, looking to raise pay for tipped workers.
There's supposedly going to be a bill introduction on the 6th, but it hasn't been finalized yet.
But City Council's agenda for December 6th has yet to reflect a bill proposal on the issue. Similar efforts in Montgomery and Prince George's counties met with strong opposition from servers and bartenders looking to keep the status quo. Amy Simpson, Fox 45 News.
Right now, Maryland's minimum wage for tipped workers is $3.63 an hour. The state's overall minimum wage will hit $15 an hour January 1st.
As Baltimore City struggles to balance its budget, the city is offering more financial assistance programs than ever before. Fox 45's Rebecca Pryor has more on the taxpayer impact.
What's free for a select few likely isn't free for you. Baltimore City's current administration rolling out a slew of new assistance programs promoted as offering financial aid to those in need. The new programs ranging from basic essentials, including rent, water, gas, and electric, to internet service subsidies and free name brand shoes.
Just because a program is helping someone doesn't mean money isn't being wasted. There still should be transparency and oversight to make sure that the money is being spent wisely.
A Fox 45 investigation revealing Mayor Brandon Scott's Safe Streets program spending thousands of dollars on sneakers this year, sparking calls for an audit of the agency's finances.
There are obviously questionable items on the list that taxpayers shouldn't be paying for. They shouldn't be paying for sneakers. That's an easy one to get rid of.
But by far the most expensive and controversial program, Mayor Scott's Baltimore Young Families Success Fund, selecting 200 young parents to receive unconditional cash payments of $1,000 every month for 2 straight years.
There have been mixed results about this kind of program across the country.
According to taxpayer advocate David Williams, many of the programs are difficult to monitor and the results are even harder to measure.
It's really difficult to track the money and where the families are spending the money. And B, there's really no consistent track record of these programs working for people.
With so many new fiscal breaks being introduced, in just 1 year, a massive bill is built.
This affects taxpayers at a very deep level, especially considering that the city just announced that they may have a $100 million structural deficit starting next year.
Costs taxpayers will be asked to foot as the city struggles to balance its budget. Rebecca Pryor.
That's why every single expenditure needs to be scrutinized.
Fox 45 News.
Still ahead, health officials say dozens of toddlers are sick from toxins found in common fruit pouches. Spotlight in America investigates the surge in illnesses.
And on top of rain coming from the sky, there's also water that's coming up from the tides. We've got coastal flood warnings for coastal portions of Baltimore County, Baltimore City, as well as down into Anne Arundel County, especially places like Annapolis, as well as Bully's Quarters. Could see some moderate flooding overnight at high tide times, and maybe even some minor flooding in places like Fells Point overnight here in the city. I'm going to let you know how much rain you're going to expect by the time this is all said and done. That's all in my Weather Authority forecast.